The Legend of K comes out tomorrow. Let's see if we can't find my review and check it out. There she is. Thanks to THQ Nordic for the review copy. If you like this review or you're enjoying the channel content, please hit a like and leave a comment below. Glen and I are going to be offering a game a month for the best comment in that month. So it's a person that just puts a lot of time into their comments and just engages a lot with the community we have here at SwitchUp. There are no other requirements other than that. So pop a comment down below. Nostalgia is a funny old thing. When I think back to games like Spyro, it had graphics that far surpass anything we have today. Mario 64, well that was 8K, surely. I remember the crisp textures and crystal clear character models. GoldenEye was borderline real life. I thought I'd woken up as James Bond, or at least a creepy version who hangs out in the men's toilet spying on soldiers taking a pee. Will the Legend of K age like the ever young Will Smith, or do we have a Mickey Rourke on our hands? He is still a bit of a legend, to be fair. Let's find out. For many generations, the mystical land of Yenqing had been inhabited by many animals, mainly cats, hares, frogs and pandas. Because of a religious code called the Way, these four races had prospered throughout the ages in their own separate towns. But as the years passed, the younger generations began to defect from the Way, ultimately with no protective code to guide their races.
Evil grew, and the gorillas invaded our land. Joined by the Rack alchemists, and the grating monotony of their din. Their path of darkness spreads everywhere.
The story now focuses around a figure named K. K is a hot-headed young cat and the master's finest martial arts student. Like many of the people of the races, K does not believe in the Way and likes to focus on the physical skills and strength. This is what makes his friend Su Ling leave his town in disgust. It's a pretty interesting idea, but the voice acting is so-so.
Master says the Way is just an old myth. Master says that...
Master is an old myth himself, and he...
I really like the comic book style storyboards though. These are really cool and wouldn't look out of place in a game made today. Unfortunately, the main character himself is a little like Marmite. You'll either love him or hate him. He reminded me of my own youthful optimism in the 90s. My 2018 old man self wanted to punch him in his silly cat face. Story gets 14 out of 20. The Legend of K pretty much encapsulates the best and worst of late 90s platforming games. Thankfully, with the anniversary edition, some optional steps have been taken to make the whole experience a little more palatable. Particularly for newer players, you control K in the third person. The original camera though was an absolute joke, but here you're offered a new camera which strangely isn't the default in the options. Also, you can toggle to be able to skip all dialogue and load screens that are no longer required. And if you're going to buy the game, make sure you switch this on by default. It makes a big difference to how the game plays. K has a variety of skills such as jumping, rolling and double jumping. He can swing from ropes, chain combos to fly through the air and do extra high somersaults from a crouched position. The game's first hour introduces you to these mechanics with the help of your partially intoxicated master.
Ready for my next lesson?
Good. Never interrupt a man's meditation.
Forget wax on, wax off. This master is off his face for the earlier parts of the game. Thankfully, he's just sober enough to pass on a very unique set of skills.
But what I do have are a very particular set of skills.
You can talk to characters and interact with the world with the Y button. Through doing so, you'll be given a series of pretty mundane early tasks. The odd thing here is, and this is where the game shows its age, in modern games some of these quests will be optional, with the ones you have to do being obviously essential. That's not the case here. I found myself running around like a headless cat, looking for the story mission when in actual fact I already had them. I needed to do all these seemingly pointless quests. They weren't side quests after all, from finding missing brats, to tugging on the arm of a fat cat statue, to the much more hilarious racing a wild boar through a timed assault course. Great fun to be sure, particularly when you discover you can do donuts with the boar and end up forgetting your missions and just tearing up a cornfield. The map is just plain terrible. It doesn't point to your active mission. In fact, you can't select an active mission. Just look at the ones you have by pressing the minus button. This lack of feedback was one of my biggest gripes with the game earlier on. You're expected to essentially look everywhere without any indication as to if you've been there, if you should go there. You get the picture. It was par for the course for classic PS2 games, but something we've forgotten was ever an issue, being more used to a giant arrow guiding us everywhere we need to go. Controlling K feels great. He is incredibly responsive and really benefits from the 60 frames per second frame rate. Everything is buttery smooth, combat benefits especially from this. You can chain light attacks together, but there is slightly more depth here in the form of a block mechanic. This becomes essential for defeating some of the tougher enemies. By holding your attack button, you can summon a magic lightning attack which can be devastating against groups of enemies. All of these skills are used pretty well. Combat feels surprisingly tight for an older game though, and the boss fights, while easy, are also pretty fun. There are some stealthy sections where Kay can use his best ninja cat moves to avoid patrolling enemies. Nothing too challenging, but it made for a nice change of pace. The platforming is just okay, but again has some mechanics which can be really fun and then very frustrating. You can chain your jumps supposedly by hitting twice and then jumping and pressing a direction. You should launch towards the next, whatever those weird floating skull things are called, and the chain continues. In reality, you do your first attack and the next one just doesn't seem to register and you fall to the floor. It just wasn't tight enough, and often that particular mechanic felt broken and very irritating. Add in the sections where you make one mistake and have to go right back to the start and redo the entire lot, like some of the latter races or platforming sections that have you jump a very long distance if you fall, and you have to go all the way around and try again, and the frustration builds. It wouldn't be a 90s game without a ton of fetch quests, backtracking, and finding a giant key for a locked door. There are hidden areas and some Crash Bandicoot style platforming sections, but overall the gameplay was a mixed bag. Sometimes it felt like a nostalgia joyride on a happy pig, and others it was more akin to pressing that damn button in Lost over and over again. Don't get me wrong, the game is a lot of fun. I had a big grin on my face despite many of the flaws, but you forget how far games have come over the years in terms of logical game design. Gameplay scores 15 out of 20 for a brand new player. Some platform games just have fantastic music. Banjo-Kazooie, Crash Bandicoot, Donkey Kong are all prime examples. Legend of Kay doesn't disappoint.
I'd rather not go into the master's house.
The main theme tune is an upbeat delight, and the music shifts for boss fights and stealthy sections. You'll be humming along happily for the first hour. Then the next hour will arrive, and that theme song is played maybe 10 or so more times. You still like it, but you also become aware of the lack of variety. Then 2 hours pass, and you turn the music down a little. 3 hours pass, and you start to anticipate the loop point in the track and know when it's starting again. Maybe I'm just a little bit too picky, but I noticed it, and I know some of you will as well. So while the music itself is lovely, there is a touch too much repetition. Sounds are good, they do the job, no real complaints here. Rumble is what I will from now on refer to as Lazy Rumble. It's a port of Rumble. There's max or nothing. It either sounds like you're using something you shouldn't be, or there's no sound at all. There's no nuanced HD Rumble on offer here. Music, sound and Rumble are classic in the best and the worst ways and score 14 out of 20. Now, it's a remake of an old game, so I wasn't expecting much in the way of graphics. I'm very happy indeed with how the game runs. 60 frames per second, as mentioned, looks clear and pretty crisp in docked and handheld. The most dated elements are the characters themselves. These look more like puppets, with the mouth moving like something from Sesame Street and the lifeless eyes staring weirdly into space. The world itself isn't too bad. Textures are understandably muddy, but it has a colourful palette and does a decent enough job. There is a little too much forest green though. Don't expect much in the way of variety until later in the game. Graphics are a little dated, but the game's frame rate makes up for that. Overall, I give graphics 13 out of 20. Which brings us on to value, and the game retails for $29.99 in the US. For me, that's a little bit on the expensive side for a very old game that's been out on Steam and PS4 and PS3 and literally it's been out on everything, including a DS. So for me, that's slightly Switch taxed, but it is a good game and one that you might consider picking up if you've got a little bit of the itch for the nostalgic vibes of games like Spyro and Donkey Kong. You're looking at about 13 to 14 hours gameplay, which isn't bad at all, but in my opinion this one should have been around about $19.99. And value gets 14 out of 20. So in summary, it's a really nice platforming game, it has some nice story elements, but certainly I feel that the price is a little bit too steep here. Overall, the game gets a SwitchUp score of 70%. Now you could completely ignore me, look at the gameplay score and say, no, that's a game that I want in my collection, and I would totally understand. Guys, leave a comment down below, please hit that like, maybe consider subscribing for all things Switch all the time. Keep it Switch up. See ya!